What on earth are you?
On the edge of human space, there is a rule every colonist learns fast. If you find one, there are always more. This is not folklore. This is not a scary story told to children at night. This is something that reportedly happened on a small farming colony near the Outer Rim, and according to colonial archive logs, it changed the way humans understood an entire alien species. It started with one small, shivering cub, alone, cold, left in the dirt near a farmer's field. He should have called it Inches. He should have waited for the colony rangers. Instead, he carried it home in his own coat and gave it a bed of warm hay in his barn. He thought he was saving one lost animal. He had no idea what he had just done. Because sources close to the Colonial Biology Division later confirmed something strange about this species. They do not exist alone. Not ever. Not by nature. Not by choice. By the next morning, that one cub had become 4. And that was only the beginning. What happened over the next few days would pull in colonial officials, alarmed scientists, and something far older and far more intelligent than anyone expected to find on that quiet frontier world. 3 things about this story will shock you. First, why the species doesn't do one and what that really means. Second, what showed up at that barn on the 3rd night. And third, how one farmer's small act of kindness reportedly became the first real bridge between humans and a species nobody even knew existed. Let me show you exactly how this happened. The colony world was called HFY Ridge. It sat far from Earth, past the last human checkpoints, where the land was still wild and the maps were still half empty. Farms like Wade Calloway's sat right at the edge of that wildness, close enough to the tree line that some nights you could hear things moving in the dark. Wade was 32 years old. He was not a soldier. He was not a scientist. He was just a farmer who grew wheat and kept a few animals, living a quiet life on a quiet world. That morning started like any other. The sun was still low. The air was cold and sharp. Wade walked out to check his fences, the same way he did every single day. That is when he saw it. Near the edge of his field, half hidden in the tall grass, something small was moving. At first, he thought it was a fox. Then he thought it might be a dog that had wandered too far from the settlement. But as he got closer, he realized it was neither. It was a cub. Small, thin, and shaking. Its fur was a soft gray, almost silver in the morning light. Its eyes were closed, and its tiny body trembled with every breath. It looked exhausted. It looked starving. It looked like it had been alone for a long time. Wade froze for a moment. He had never seen an animal like this before. Not in any colony record. Not in any farming manual. Not even in the wildlife guides the settlers were given when they first arrived on HFY Ridge. He crouched down slowly, the way he would with any frightened animal. The cub's ears twitched, but it did not run. It did not even try. It simply looked up at him with tired, glassy eyes, as if it had nothing left to fight with. Something about that look stuck with him. He knew the colony rule. Any unknown creature was supposed to be reported to the ranger station before anyone touched it. That rule existed for a reason. HFY Ridge sat close to unexplored territory, and nobody fully understood what lived out there. But looking at that tiny, freezing animal, Wade could not just walk away. He told himself he would report it later, after he made sure it did not die first. He took off his jacket and wrapped it gently around the cub. It did not resist. It barely had the strength to lift its head. He carried it back to his barn, cradled against his chest like something fragile and precious. Inside the barn, he made a small nest of warm hay in the corner, away from the drafts. He laid the cub down carefully and grabbed an old wool blanket to tuck around it. Its breathing was shallow, but steady. Wade sat beside it for a long moment, just watching. He noticed small details he had missed outside. The cub's paws were larger than they should be for its size, almost built for something bigger. Its ears were long and slightly curved, more alert-looking than any earth animal he had seen. He tried to feed it a little warm broth from a bowl, using his fingers to guide it gently to its mouth. At first, the cub refused. Then, slowly, weakly, it began to drink. Relief washed over him. For the first time since finding it, Wade allowed himself to relax, just slightly. He told himself the worst was over. He told himself this was simply an injured animal that needed rest and food, nothing more. He had no way of knowing that somewhere out past the tree line, in the deep, quiet wilderness beyond his fields, something had already noticed the cub was missing. And whatever it was already moving. As the day went on, Wade returned to his usual chores. He fed his livestock. He checked his crops. But every hour or so, he found himself walking back into the barn just to check on the small creature curled up in the hay. By afternoon, the cub had gained a little strength. It could lift its head fully now. It watched Wade with quiet, careful eyes whenever he entered, as if studying him the same way he was studying it. He still had not called the ranger station. Part of him told himself he was waiting until he knew the cub would survive the day. Another part of him, one he did not fully admit yet, simply did not want to give it up so soon. As evening approached, the wind picked up outside. The barn creaked gently in the breeze. Wade lit a small lantern and sat with the cub a while longer before locking up for the night. Right before he left, the cub let out a soft, strange sound. It was not quite a whimper and not quite a howl. It was something in between, low and steady, almost like a call. Wade paused at the door, frowning slightly. He told himself it was just the sound of a tired animal settling down to sleep. He had no idea it was something else entirely. He had no idea that sound was about to travel much farther than his small wooden barn. Wade woke up before sunrise the next morning, the same way he always did. But something felt different the moment his boots hit the floor. He could not explain it. It was just a feeling, quiet and heavy, like the air itself had shifted overnight. He walked out to the barn first, before even starting his usual chores. He wanted to check on the cub, to make sure it had made it through the night. When he pushed open the barn door, he stopped completely still. The cub was still there, curled up in the hay, exactly where he had left it. But it was not alone anymore. 3 more cubs were pressed close against it, sleeping in a tight little pile. Their fur matched the first one almost exactly, that same soft gray color, and their small bodies rose and fell gently with each breath. Wade blinked hard, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him in the dim morning light. He stepped closer, careful and slow. The cubs did not stir. They looked calm, safe even, tangled together in a way that seemed almost natural, as if they had always been together. He crouched down beside them, his mind racing. He had locked the barn door the night before. He was certain of it. There was no way in through the walls, no gap large enough for an animal to slip through unnoticed. And yet, somehow, 3 more cubs had found their way inside. He noticed something else too. The first cub, the one he had found in the field, looked different this morning. Stronger, calmer. Its eyes were brighter, and its breathing was steady and deep. It was as if finding the others had done more for its recovery than anything Wade had given it. He sat back on his heels, staring at the 4 small creatures. A strange thought crossed his mind, one he almost laughed off before it fully settled. What if this animal was never meant to be alone in the first place? He thought about pack animals he had read about back on Earth, wolves and wild dogs that lived and hunted in tight family groups. Maybe this species was something similar, only far more extreme. Maybe being alone was not just unusual for them. Maybe it was dangerous. Wade spent the next hour simply observing them, forgetting his morning chores entirely. The cubs woke slowly, one by one, blinking in the soft light filtering through the barn slats. They pressed close to each other instinctively, nudging and nuzzling, checking on one another the way siblings might after a long, hard night apart. He offered them the same warm broth from the day before. This time, all 4 cubs ate eagerly, taking turns without any fighting or pushing. It struck him as strangely peaceful, almost coordinated, like they somehow already understood how to share. As the sun rose higher, Wade finally stepped outside to think. He knew he needed to report this now. 4 unknown animals appearing overnight, with no clear way in, was far beyond simple wildlife rescue. This was something the colony rangers needed to know about immediately. But even as he pulled out his communicator, his hand hesitated over the call button. He thought about how calm the cubs had been, how gentle, how they had shown no aggression toward him at all, only quiet curiosity and cautious trust. If he reported this too quickly, he worried the colony might react with fear instead of caution, sending armed patrols instead of careful researchers. He decided to wait, just a little longer, to gather more information first. He walked the perimeter of his barn slowly, checking every wall, every gap, every possible entrance. Everything was intact. Nothing had been broken or forced open. There were no tracks in the dirt outside, beyond his own footprints from the day before. It was as if the cubs had simply appeared. By midday, Wade noticed the first cub, the original one he had found, sitting near the barn door, staring out toward the tree line in the distance. Its ears were fully upright, alert, focused on something far beyond human sight or hearing. The other 3 cubs soon joined it, all 4 lined up quietly, watching the same direction. Wade felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the weather. Whatever these creatures were, they were not lost. They were not random strays that had wandered onto his property by accident. Something out there was calling them. And judging by the way all 4 cubs sat frozen, ears sharp and eyes locked on the horizon, Wade had a growing feeling that something out there already knew exactly where they were. That evening, Wade finally made the call to the colony ranger station. His voice was steady, but his mind was still trying to process everything from the past 2 days. He described the first cub, the sudden appearance of 3 more, and the strange behavior he had witnessed throughout the day. The ranger on the line, a woman named Officer Reyes, listened carefully. According to later colonial reports, her first instinct was disbelief. Unknown animals suddenly multiplying overnight sounded more like a story than a real event. But something in Wade's tone convinced her to take it seriously. She promised to send a small survey team out the next morning, along with a biologist from the colony's research outpost. Wade agreed, relieved that help was finally on the way, though a small part of him still felt oddly protective of the cubs curled up safely in his barn. That night, he checked on them one final time before locking up. All four were sleeping soundly, pressed together in their usual tight pile. He noticed their breathing had synced almost perfectly, rising and falling together like one single creature instead of four separate ones. He left the lantern burning low and walked back to his house, glancing over his shoulder more than once at the dark tree line beyond his fields. The following morning, the survey team arrived just after sunrise. It consisted of 3 rangers and a young biologist named Dr. Elena Ward, who worked at the colony's small research station studying local wildlife. She had heard rumors of strange, unclassified creatures near the frontier, but nothing had ever been confirmed until now. When she saw the cubs for herself, her reaction was immediate and intense. She knelt beside them carefully, studying their fur, their eyes, their unusual paw structure, taking careful notes the entire time. According to her early field report, she believed the cubs belonged to a species never before documented by human colonists. She suspected they were juveniles of a highly social, possibly pack-bonded species, based on their behavior and physical closeness. She also confirmed something that sent a quiet chill through the room. There were no traces of adult tracks anywhere near the farm. No signs of a den. No indication of where these cubs had originally come from, or how 3 of them had managed to reach the barn without leaving a single footprint outside. Dr. Ward suggested, cautiously, that the species might possess some form of long-range communication far beyond simple sound, something that allowed separated members to sense each other's location, even across great distances. It was, she admitted, only a theory, but it was the only explanation that fit what they were seeing. Wade listened closely, arms crossed, watching the cubs interact with the researchers exactly as they had with him, calm, curious, and completely unafraid. As the team continued their examination, one of the rangers stepped outside to check the surrounding fields for any additional signs of activity. Minutes later, he returned looking pale, asking everyone to come outside immediately. Wade and Dr. Ward followed him out to the edge of the property, where he pointed toward the tree line in the distance. There, standing just at the border between the farmland and the wild forest beyond, were 2 large shapes, too far to make out clearly, but unmistakably alive, unmistakably watching. They were massive compared to the tiny cubs back in the barn, standing tall and still, their silhouettes sharp against the morning light. Neither moved, neither approached. They simply stood there, motionless, observing the farm from a distance. Dr. Ward raised a pair of field binoculars slowly, her hands trembling slightly. After a long moment, she lowered them and spoke quietly, almost to herself. She said they looked like the adult version of the cubs, only far larger and far more alert. Wade felt his heart pounding in his chest. He realized, standing there in the open field, that they were no longer looking at 4 lost baby animals. They were looking at the very edge of first contact with something far bigger than anyone had expected. And whatever those 2 adults were waiting for, it was clear they had no intention of leaving without their young. The colony reacted quickly once word reached the main settlement. Within hours, Officials from the local government office contacted the research station, requesting immediate updates. According to internal colonial correspondence from that period, there was serious concern about safety, both for Wade's farm and for the wider settlement nearby. A decision was made to send additional personnel, including a small security detail, though strict orders were given to avoid any aggressive action unless absolutely necessary. The colony leadership understood, even then, that this was likely the most significant unknown species encounter since Ashwell Ridge had first been settled. Wade was asked to stay calm and continue his normal routine as much as possible, since the cubs still seemed comfortable and safe around him specifically. Dr. Ward believed his continued presence might actually help prevent unnecessary tension with the watching adults. That afternoon, the two large figures at the tree line had not moved. They remained exactly where they had first appeared, silent and patient, as if waiting for some unspoken signal. Dr. Ward suggested a careful approach. Rather than attempting direct contact themselves, she recommended allowing Wade to return to his usual barn routine, feeding and caring for the cubs as he had been doing since the very first day. If the adults truly were connected to the cubs the way she suspected, this simple, familiar act might communicate safety far better than any formal introduction ever could. Wade agreed, though his hands were shaking slightly as he walked back toward the barn that evening. Inside, the four cubs greeted him the same way they always did, pressing close and nuzzling gently against his legs. He sat down among them, offering their usual meal, doing his best to appear calm despite the two enormous shapes watching from beyond the fence line. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, one of the adult figures began to move. It approached the farm with slow, deliberate steps, clearly cautious but unmistakably purposeful. As it drew closer, its true size became apparent. Standing at what researchers later estimated to be nearly 9 feet tall, its body was covered in the same silver-gray fur as the cubs, though its build was far more powerful, with long, muscular limbs and sharp, intelligent eyes. Everyone at the scene held their breath. The creature stopped just outside the barn, its gaze locked on Wade and the cubs beside him. It did not growl. It did not show any obvious signs of aggression. Instead, it simply watched, studying the scene with careful, measured attention. Dr. Ward whispered urgently for everyone to remain still and quiet. Wade, trembling slightly but trying to stay calm, gently reached out and stroked the head of the nearest cub, the same one he had originally found alone in the field. The cub let out that same soft, steady sound from before, low and warm, almost like reassurance directed toward its approaching parent. The massive creature's posture shifted almost immediately. Its shoulders relaxed. Its head lowered slightly. Whatever tension had been building seemed to ease all at once. According to later reports compiled by colonial researchers, this moment would go on to be considered the true beginning of communication between humans and this previously unknown species. The adult crept closer, step by careful step, until it stood just at the barn entrance. Wade did not move. He simply continued sitting quietly among the cubs, allowing the creature to observe him up close for the first time. After a long, tense silence, the adult lowered itself down, folding its powerful limbs beneath its body, settling just outside the barn door in a position that suggested calm rather than threat. The second adult soon followed, mirroring the first, taking up a quiet position nearby. Neither attempted to take the cubs by force. Neither showed any sign of wanting to harm Wade or the researchers present. Instead, they simply stayed close, watching, waiting, as if silently confirming that their young were truly safe. Dr. Ward later noted in her official report that this behavior strongly suggested a highly intelligent, deeply protective species, one capable of recognizing kindness and responding to it with patience rather than fear or aggression. For the first time since the entire event began, a fragile sense of calm settled over the farm. But everyone present understood that this was only the beginning of something far larger, something that would soon reach far beyond one small colony world. Over the following days, a careful and quiet relationship began to form between Wade's farm and the two adult creatures, who continued returning each evening to check on their cubs. Researchers were eventually able to observe them from a respectful distance, gathering more information about their behavior, communication patterns, and social structure. According to the findings later compiled by the Colonial Science Division, this species appeared to live in tightly bonded family groups, almost never separating for extended periods. Losing even a single member of the group seemed to trigger powerful, almost instinctive search response from every other member connected to it, which explained how the 3 additional cubs had managed to find their sibling so quickly after Wade brought it into the barn. Scientists theorized that some form of subtle, long-range biological connection existed between family members, something far beyond simple scent or sound, though the exact nature of it remained a mystery for a long time afterward. Wade continued caring for the cubs throughout this period, and slowly, cautiously, the adults allowed him closer access, seemingly recognizing him as someone who had protected their young when they could not. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the entire event began, something remarkable happened. The larger of the 2 adults approached Wade directly, without hesitation, and lowered its head gently in front of him. Dr. Ward, who witnessed the moment firsthand, later described it in her notes as an unmistakable gesture of gratitude, comparable to certain bonding behaviors seen in highly social animal species back on Earth. Wade, unsure exactly what to do, reached out slowly and rested his hand against the creature's massive head, the same way he had done with the cubs since that very first cold morning in the field. The moment was quiet, simple, and completely unexpected. But it marked something far bigger than either of them fully understood at the time. Word of the encounter eventually spread beyond Ashwell Ridge, reaching colonial headquarters and, in time, becoming one of the earliest documented cases of peaceful, first contact between humans and this species, later formally identified in colonial records as the Vesari, native to the deep forest regions surrounding several frontier settlements. Diplomatic and scientific teams were eventually sent to study the species further, though colonial officials specifically noted that Wade's farm remained one of the few locations where the Vesari continued to willingly approach humans without hesitation or fear. Reports suggest that this initial trust, built entirely through one farmer's simple act of kindness toward a single lost cub, became the foundation for careful, respectful communication between the 2 species in the years that followed. The 4 cubs eventually grew, strong and healthy, occasionally seen at the edges of Wade's fields alongside their parents, a quiet reminder of how the entire event had begun. Wade never considered himself a hero. He always insisted, according to those who later interviewed him, that he simply could not walk away from a scared, freezing animal in need of help. But colonial historians would go on to describe that single choice, made on an ordinary morning, as the moment everything changed between humans and a species that had lived hidden and unknown for generations. And it all started with one small, shivering cub, because as everyone on Ashwell Ridge eventually learned, this species simply does not do one. Here is the detail most people miss when they hear this story. The cub Wade found that first morning was never lost by accident. According to later Vesari behavioral studies, young cubs are occasionally, deliberately, left alone for short periods as a kind of test, a way for the family group to observe how outsiders react to a vulnerable member of their species. If that theory holds true, Wade was never simply saving a helpless animal. He was reportedly being watched from the very first moment, judged not by strength or weapons, but by simple kindness. He passed a test he never knew he was taking. That is the twist behind the story. The single cub in the field was not an accident at all. It may have been the very first, quiet message sent by a species that had been observing human colonists long before anyone realized it. One small act of compassion, offered without hesitation, reportedly opened a door that fear and force never could. If this opened your eyes to how first contact stories can begin in the smallest, quietest moments, wait until you see what happens in the next chapter of this world, where the Vesari finally reveal just how long they had truly been watching human settlements before that single cold morning. So let's bring this back together. One farmer found one small, freezing cub, and by morning, there were four. That single choice, made out of simple kindness, led to the first peaceful contact between humans and a hidden species called the Vesari. And the biggest twist of all is that Wade may have been tested from the very beginning, without ever knowing it. Stories like this remind us that in the HFY universe, humanity's greatest strength is not always power or weapons. Sometimes, it is something as simple as choosing kindness when no one is watching. If you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next HFY tale. This channel brings you new human first contact stories every single week, filled with mystery, emotion, and the kind of moments that remind us why humanity always finds a way to stand out among the stars. Drop a like if this story gave you chills, and let me know in the comments what you think the Vesari were really testing Wade for. Was it kindness, courage, or something else entirely? If you want more stories like this one, check out the next video linked on screen, where we explore what happens when the Vesari finally reveal themselves to the entire colony, and how that discovery changes everything for Ashwell Ridge. For those who want deeper access to upcoming stories, behind-the-scenes lore, and early releases before anyone else, consider joining our community newsletter linked in the description below. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Stories like this are only possible because of viewers like you who keep coming back for more. So tell me, right now in the comments, if you were Wade, would you have brought that first cub inside, knowing what you know now? I'll see you in the next story.